Welcome back. All right, so in the redraft realm, I had not expected to do this summer. But last night I was looking through old videos and, coming up with, using my trusty notebook here, video ideas and things that I could do over the next little while here. Because remember, I'm pre-recording for when we go on holidays as well. And so there will be at least one, probably two redrafts dropping while I'm on holiday. But I wanted to redo this one because I did a 2014 redraft just using the 30 names on the board. And so that was fun. It was fun and everything, but I want to do it this time doing it the way that I now do redrafts, which is the same as everybody else. Part of the reason I used to do it where I was just restructuring these 30 names is because I hadn't seen it done that way before. But yeah, so this will include everybody outside the first round. So I didn't care about where I had everybody drafted. As soon as I saw the way that I was doing it, I was like, okay, I want to redo 2014 because this is a stellar draft, including Mr. Leon Draisaitl here. So the top four that year, Ekblad, Reinhart, Draisaitl, and Bennett, it was seen that you couldn't go wrong with any of the four. And the debate really was, so who's going to go first? And it was a wide open draft. Of course, Florida ends up drafting Ekblad. I don't think there's any regret in Florida for drafting Ekblad. He's a very good defenseman. He's underrated outside of Florida. Absolutely. Injuries have caused some of that too. But for this redraft, number one overall going to Florida. And don't worry, Oiler fans, this isn't binding. It's Leon Draisaitl. So Draisaitl going number one overall to Florida. I don't know if it's necessarily close between him and the number two pick, but I can understand why people would pick the guys that I have in the 2 and 3 spot. Why people might say, well, that guy should go first. But yeah, to me, Leon Draisaitl's number one, and at number two, one of, if not the best goal scorer in the league right now. Let's take that off of there. Getting ahead of myself. Pastrnak. David Pastrnak, of course, ends up being drafted 25th originally by the Boston Bruins. He's a pretty good player. And, Pastrnak going to Buffalo. I know Sam Reinhart, the trade with Sam Reinhart, fascinating, but I think if you could go back in time and give Buffalo Pastrnak and not make that Reinhart trade, I think those are two things that Buffalo fans would be okay with. I think even though they're one of the top goal-scoring teams in the league, add Pasta to that group and see what happens. Underrated player in some forms. The goal-scoring is what everybody focuses on, but he really is an MVP-level player, and so he goes number two. Going number three to the Edmonton Oilers, Tampa Bay's Brayden Point. So this is the first case of a player drafted outside the first round being on this board. And so Brayden Point absolutely would jump up to the number 3 spot. Again, don't worry, Tampa. You're not losing Brayden Point. This is just a redraft. And I don't know how Oiler fans are going to feel about going from Draisaitl to Point. I will say this. Brayden Point is a legit star player who has been a key playoff performer as well. So, I don't know. Maybe that's not a downgrade in the playoffs. You guys can let me know your thoughts. Because, again, Draisaitl's been very good in the playoffs, too. I don't think you can go wrong with any of these top three. That being said, the question then becomes, so goaltenders. This draft had some serious talent in net. And I went back and forth on which goaltender to take first. So going to Calgary, Ilya Sorokin. And so for Flames fans, of course, this is something that I'm sure they'd be quite happy with, having Ilya Sorokin as their goaltender. No offense to Markstrom, no offense to Vladar, but Sorokin is arguably one of the best goaltenders in the league. I would say he is absolutely top 5 in the National Hockey League. You can argue him top 3, but then you get into arguments about Saros gets a lot of support, Vasilevsky gets a lot of support. Olmark's coming off of a great year. If he can follow it up with another great year, he'll be in the conversation as well. There's some very good goaltenders in the NHL. So Sorokin ends up 4th on the board. And he's 4th on the board, even though going 5th then. And this is going to seem like sacrilege. Shesterkin goes to the New York Islanders. I know. Ranger fans not happy right now. Seeing that logo next to that name is going to drive them a little bit crazy. But yeah, Shesterkin, Sorokin, I don't think you can go wrong with either goaltender. I'm really glad they're in the same division, that they're on rivals, that we're going to see them. In all likelihood, at some point in time, we get a Ranger-Islanders playoff series, and we'll see these goaltenders directly against one another. which I absolutely would support and think that would be fantastic. But if you want to argue Shesterkin over Sorokin, I started out that way and then I was thinking about it and I thought, Sorokin has been consistent long enough and Shesterkin wasn't quite as good this year as last year. Yeah, so again, they're really, really close to one another. Number 6 on the board, going to the Vancouver Canucks. This one's going to sting. This one's going to sting, Canuck fans, because it's William Nylander. So, while New York Islanders drafted Michael Del Cole, which turned out to be a mistake, Jake Virtanen being picked by the Vancouver Canucks, we can argue that as a mistake as well. William Nylander, star player for the Toronto Maple Leafs, fantastic winger. He is a Swedish player. And honestly, looking back, I'm still kind of surprised the Canucks didn't take Nylander because they do have a long history of picking up Swedish forwards. And we knew how good Nylander could be at the time that he ends up being taken 8th by the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, Virtanen had a good track record as well in juniors, but again, looking back, Virtanen will not be in this first round, obviously. Del Cole, not in this first round, obviously. And neither's Hayden Fleury, who was taken 7th overall, and instead, in 7th, Dylan Larkin. So, how loaded is this draft? Like, Larkin going 7th overall tells you this draft is a pretty stacked setup. And again, for Carolina, if they had Larkin, right? Again, Detroit fans, this is not something you have to worry about, obviously. He was 15th originally in the draft. In this redraft, he gets taken 7th. So, yeah, Larkin was a steal at 15th overall for Detroit and has built himself up into a pretty solid two-way forward. One that, of course, has leadership with that as well. And I don't think we can underrate leadership necessarily. So, Larkin is right there at number 7. So who does Vancouver got Nylander. So who goes at 8th to the Toronto Maple Leafs? Well, this is where it gets a bit interesting because I went back and forth on whether or not Ekblad would go after or before Larkin. Again, because I do think that Ekblad's underrated. But Aaron Ekblad in Toronto, that would be fantastic, right? You'd have Morgan Rielly, you'd have Aaron Ekblad. This would be a pretty solid blue line for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Ekblad is underrated at this stage in his career. If he can get an 82-game season in this year and play the way that I think most Florida fans knows that he can, he will get into Norris consideration. He will be seen as a Norris dark horse. I don't know if he'd ever be a favorite, but he can score goals. He can do a little bit of everything. He can play a ton of minutes. And Ekblad, I think he'd be welcome on the Toronto blue line. Absolutely. Number 9, going to the Winnipeg Jets. Coming off of a really strong season. And just in general, I like Adrian Kempe. Now, the interesting thing with Kempe is that taking him over Ehlers isn't easy. Ehlers, I think where I decided to go with Kempe instead, and Ehlers drops his health. Kempe stayed healthy this season. Ehlers just had problems staying healthy over the last couple of years. So I went with Kempe at 9. And so originally Kempe's drafted 29th overall by LA, so that is an absolute steal. Not Sorokin or Shesterkin level, but still a steal. All right, now we get into double digits. Number 10, going to the Anaheim Ducks, who originally took Nick Ritchie, Jared McCann. I always liked the McCann pick by the Canucks, number 24 here by Vancouver. When the Canucks traded McCann, I wasn't happy. That's why I titled that. Canucks traded McCann. I'm not happy because, hey, get creative with your titles. And to this day, I still think the Canucks made a bit of a mistake trading McCann. McCann, of course, the first 40 goal scorer in the history of the Seattle Kraken. He really looks like he's the real deal. And so, yeah, he ends up going 10th in this one. So both Kempe and McCann, who had fantastic years and seem to be trending in the direction of being really solid top 6 players for a long time. They end up being in that top 10. And again, both of them moving up, but both of them first rounders from this draft. Number 11, and dropping from 2, currently Florida Panther, Sam Reinhart. Now, Reinhart's an interesting one because I wouldn't say he was a flop. And I've seen that where people, he's a bust. He's not a bust. He's a good player. But he doesn't go in this top 10 because of the star-studded top 10. And again, with Reinhart, the debate about him ahead of McCann you could have. You could also debate moving him down once I get 12 and 13 on the board. I'm sure there'll be some debate. Again, with redrafts, there's not really a right and wrong answer. It's just kind of a fun thing to do to say, well, this is where I put the guys, and then you guys tell me where you would have them rated. But yeah, Sam Reinhart, good player. May never end up being, that number 2 draft pick level that people might have expected when he was drafted. But of the Reinhart brothers, he's the one that stuck in the NHL. Griffin, I was really high on, and it didn't work out. Max Reinhart, I thought was hardworking, but eventually he was out of the NHL as well. So Sam, still there and playing well. Number 12, LA Kings star forward Kevin Fiala. So instead of drafting Brandon Perlini, the Arizona Coyotes would have drafted Fiala. Again, this is a really good deep draft. So Fiala, of course, a star player, ends up out of Minnesota, goes to LA. Would have been LA's leading scorer if not for injury. So Kopitar gets that crown again, which is still remarkable even though injury helps Kopitar get that spot. Fiala genuinely played, I thought, a really good season with LA, and that sustainability seems to be there. So, yeah, these are all pretty good, pretty well-paid players as well. Number 13 on the board, it's not Jacob Vrana. It is, see, I had to say Jacob Vrana, which means that then I start rating the wrong name. Nick Ehlers. Nick Ehlers drops from 9th to 13th. Good player, can score 30 goals in a season. I love his work ethic. It's just he needs to be able to stay healthy for a full season. And I would argue that for Winnipeg this year with, trades that could be pending, you look at Scheifele, you look at Hellebuck, it might be more important for Ehlers to be healthy this season than previous years because of the forward group being changed. Ehlers is a legitimate goal scorer, and again, he can hit the 30-goal mark. So number 13 going to Washington. I think Caps fans would be happy with Ehlers. Number 14 on the board, going to Dallas. So Thatcher Demko is a tough one to really rate. Because Demko, going into this past season, there were really high expectations. He didn't play particularly well, clearly wasn't 100%. When he came back from injury, he was very, very good. Demko, I think, now is being underrated. But that being said, I can only go by what the numbers are right now. The numbers have not been, in that same realm as Shesterkin or Sorokin. I think he has the potential to put up some really, really good numbers. But for right now, I felt like 14th was the right spot for him in this redraft. And if you had Dallas with Demko and Ottinger, I think Dallas would be happy with that. But yeah, so Demko goes 14th. 15th on the board, going to the Detroit Red Wings. So they lose Dylan Larkin. They gain Alex Tuch. The interesting thing is that Tuch, when he was in Vegas, I think we might have been underestimating him. And I'm saying we as in myself as well. Since he got to Buffalo, it's just worked really, really well. He's got tremendous offensive instincts, and he could very well be a legit top-line forward in the NHL for years to come. So yeah, while losing Larkin would definitely upset Detroit fans, I think Alex Tuch's a good consolation prize, much like Brayden Point is, in place of Leon Draisaitl for the Oilers. Is it the same? No, but I think that's a pretty solid plan if the reality for Detroit was, well, you don't get Larkin this time. Well, we'll just take Tuch then. Number 16 on the board. 16 is going to Columbus. It's not Sonny Milano this time. Sam Bennett. Now, Bennett's numbers this past season weren't great. 16 goals, 24 assists. Now, he did deal with injuries. Sam Bennett definitely has an edge to his game. He's very, very solid, pest kind of player at times as well. For Bennett, I think a spot in Columbus, he might have suited Columbus quite well if he'd ended up in Columbus. And I do like Bennett's playoff game quite a bit. I think that his ability to raise his game when he was in Calgary in the playoffs And then the way he's played in Florida, I think, has been quite strong. But again, his numbers were down this year, and so we'll see how he bounces back next year. Because if he bounces back, then if I did this redraft again next year, my guess is Bennett would be ahead of Tuck, maybe ahead of Ehlers if Ehlers has injury problems again. But at this rate, yeah, he is Columbus bound in my redraft at this stage. Number 17 on the board. So I went back and forth on Devon Toews. Devon Toews, a blue liner to Philly instead of Travis Sanheim. So with Toews, there are people who love his game. There are people who think he's not very good. And I've seen the varying opinions on Devon Toews. I like Toews. I debated about whether or not to have him ahead of Bennett. But for me, yeah, Toews, solid defenseman for the Colorado Avalanche. A team that does have an underrated blue line in general. They did win the Cup last year. They haven't really lost anything there either. Their blue line's still really solidly built. So yeah, Devon Toews at 17. I might be underselling him. He might be 3 or 4 spots too low. And you can write that on your phone. No, don't do that. It won't come off. This is dry erase only for me. If you're writing on your phone and go, well, it's a dry erase board. It's not going to work that way. Number 18. You might not get your phone back. You did what with the phone? All right, number 18 going to Minnesota. It's not Alex Tuck because he was taken there. But instead, we have another player who moves up. So Nick Schmaltz was originally taken 20th. I have Nick Schmaltz being taken 18th by the Minnesota Wild. I am unapologetically a fan of Nick Schmaltz's game. I think he's been underrated for years. I think that continues to be the case. It may help that he plays in Arizona for him to be underrated. I've seen people discussing Arizona. Oh, their roster looks terrible. It doesn't. That first line with Schmaltz on it was fantastic towards the end of the year, but I understand why people don't necessarily believe in it. Number 19. This is a tough one, too. So, Tony DeAngelo, who, for me, wasn't in the top 30, and I will explain. Don't worry. Brandon Montour goes to Tampa Bay instead. Now, Montour was a tough one because by the standards of this season, Montour probably belongs up in this region. Maybe belongs up here. But Montour's career prior to this season, there wasn't really an indication of this explosion happening offensively and his play just being that much better. So I'm probably being a little bit conservative in where I have him because I don't know if it's just a career year. And so with Montour, because with Kempe and McCann, I do believe this is something that can be sustainable. With Montour, I'm not entirely sure, And again, that's a completely subjective opinion. You guys can let me know your thoughts. But for me, Montour at 19 makes a lot of sense. Number 20 on the board. So you lose Schmaltz, but you gain an Arvidsson. Victor Arvidsson's a hardworking forward. He's struggled with injuries as well. Otherwise, he'd be higher on the board. But Victor Arvidsson, I've been a fan of his since the playoff run by the Nashville Predators in 2017. And I want to say even prior to that. At first few games I saw Arvidsson play, which was before the goal scoring showed up, I was just really impressed with how hard he worked with his board play. And so he kind of became a player I was watching. And he's been pretty good. He's pretty good for LA as well. So again, if he could stay healthy, it makes a huge difference. But that can be said about a lot of players, as we've seen already, and I'm likely to discuss again. Number 21 on the board. This is ironic, isn't it? I do not actually plot out who goes where when I do these redrafts. I just put down the number. And a lot of the time I don't even put down the number. This time I did. But this has Travis Sanheim going 21st to St. Louis. Toews ends up going to Philadelphia instead. So Sanheim drops to 21. And I say it's ironic because there were rumors that Sanheim going to St. Louis was a possibility. Krug would have been going the other way. That would have been in the Kevin Hayes trade. And that Krug said, I'm not going to Philadelphia. It's not happening. So instead, Sanheim's still Flyers property, but it'd be interesting if Sanheim had gone to St. Louis. His contract's not fantastic, but Sanheim, the defenseman, can be quite good. He had a rough first half in Philadelphia, got better as the season went along. But yeah, I like Sanheim. I like him at 21. And so, again, he'll be looking to have a bounce-back season, but in Philly, that could be tough. That team is going through its rebuild right now. Number 22 on the board, another one that's tough to rate. So, Gustav Forsling. That is 3 blue liners from Florida. Ekblad, Montour, Forsling. Florida's blue line's pretty good. Forsling, of course, was a Canucks draft pick who they gave up on way too quickly. And then he ends up on waivers and ends up in Florida. So in this draft, he ends up with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Kasperi Kapanen was originally their pick there. Now, again, with Forsling, maybe with the slow development, he wouldn't have ended up playing in Pittsburgh, but how would that blue line look with Gustav Forsling on it? And I have to say, again, this really shows the strength of professional scouting that the Florida Panthers organization has, that they saw what Montour and Forsling could do and picked them up. So really strong professional scouting. We always talk about amateur scouts and the good amateur scouts and teams that scout well. Pro scouting is underrated. Your ability to watch another NHL team and say, that guy's not being utilized very well here. On our team, he could make a big difference. That could be huge. Las Vegas, the Golden Knights absolutely have really strong professional scouting, and that definitely makes a difference. 23, Connor Bleakley is not going 23. Instead, Victor Olofsson. So Victor Olofsson, who is, of course, a member of the Buffalo Sabres, he had a 28-goal season. I might be underrating Olofsson a little bit here. I very well might be underrating Olofsson a little bit. Again, forward here, you've got defense. So 3 out of 5 are defense there. And Olofsson, I think, is a solid goal scorer. Colorado, I would think, would appreciate having Olofsson over Bleakley, although with the cap issues that Colorado is now experiencing, which, I mean, when you win a Stanley Cup, that's going to happen sooner or later. But yeah, Olofsson, really, really good player. Again, goal scorer. Scored a bunch for Buffalo, who didn't. But yeah, I like Olofsson, and he's very good on the power play as well. Number 24. So this is where the Canucks initially drafted McCann. Instead, how about Barbashev? Barbashev, of course, drafted by St. Louis, ends up with the Vegas Golden Knights for when they win the Stanley Cup. Barbashev, really, really good forward. It feels like he's getting better as he gets older as well. So Barbashev's numbers have been very good. They may actually get better this coming season in Vegas as well. Now, in the case of Barbashev as well, there were Canuck fans that were really kind of hoping he would hit the market and that the Canucks would pick him up for that third-line center spot, that much coveted. But, of course, they picked up a different Vegas Golden Knight in Teddy Bluger, who is not a part of this draft. But, yeah, Barbashev, 24th to Vancouver, would have solved a lot of Vancouver's problems. Although McCann, if they'd held on to him, that could have solved some of the team's problems as well. Just shows you don't want to abandon a prospect too early in their development. Number 25 on the board. Going back to a goaltender. So you go from Pasternak to Vanacek. Vanacek, solid year for him with the New Jersey Devils. Coming off of a bit of a down year with the Washington Capitals the year before. Vanacek's a good 1A, 1B option in the net. And so for Boston, they end up drafting Vanacek. This is a really deep draft, though. This is, again, where I point this out. That usually by the time I get to 25th, we're talking about maybe good players. In this case, it's Vanacek, who was a starter this past season for the New Jersey Devils. So pretty strong from top to bottom here. Number 26, going to Montreal. Instead of Nikita Sherbak, who never really hit, Jacob Vrana. So Vrana ends up going 26th. Vrana was originally taken 13th by Washington. Vrana, I really hope we see a really strong comeback story from him this coming season. And, I'd like to see 20, 25 goals from him. He can hit 30 if he can stay healthy, play the whole season with the right opportunity. So I hope Vrana does become a big comeback story after what was a really rough year for him over the last 12 months. So, yeah, 26 to Montreal. Vrana, Montreal could use a goal scorer. Sherbak never really hit, so that makes some sense. Vrana, 26. 27. So Goldobin was drafted by San Jose at 27th. Frustrated them while he was there. Then he came to Vancouver. Frustrated me as a Canucks fan. In this case, I have San Jose drafting Marcus Pettersson, a top 4 defenseman for the Pittsburgh Penguins, who in my redraft draft Forsling, And there will be Penguins fans going, well, why Forsling ahead of Pettersson? I just, at this point in time, feel like Forsling is playing some very good hockey. Pettersson's a solid defenseman as well. Again, this is a really deep draft. This is part of the reason why when I was looking at it last night, I was like, I have to redraft this one. Pettersson, a big part of that too. And if they had him in San Jose, that would definitely improve that blue line. That blue line could definitely use a Marcus Pettersson right now. Number 28, and this is where Josh Ho-Sang was originally drafted. It's another defenseman. I have Jake Walman going to the New York Islanders. Walman showed Detroit fans this year how good he can be. Walman showed that in St. Louis as well. I've been a fan of his from day one, and so he ends up 28th on this draft. Walman, when he was paired with Seider, all of a sudden, Moritz Seider's year got better. I don't think that's a coincidence. Most Detroit fans don't think that was a coincidence either. Now, does that say Walman's really good or that Sherratt was a problem? I think Sherratt didn't have the chemistry with Seider, and I think the fact Walman does shows you he can be a legit top 4 defenseman in the NHL. He's never going to wow you offensively, but he's got some skill there as well, and so he ends up 28th. 29th, Christian Dvorak. So Christian Dvorak, he was drafted, of course, by Arizona. In this case, Dvorak ends up being drafted by LA at 29th. Currently, of course, a member of the Montreal Canadiens. There have been rumors about whether or not he might be on the trade block this summer. Still hasn't happened to this point. Doesn't mean it's not going to. It just hasn't happened to this point. And again, solid drafted at 29th. We see Christian Dvorak, a good third-line player there. Which brings us to spot number 30. And honorable mention to Kevin Labanc, who doesn't quite make the top 30. If I was doing this a couple years ago, he would have. But at this point, I'm going with Kasperi Kapanen. So Kapanen goes to the New Jersey Devils instead of John Quenneville, who was originally drafted 30th. And so, yeah, Kapanen goes there. He can score 20 goals in a season. He's done it before. I think he could do it again. And it shows this is a deep draft. So who dropped out of it? Who dropped? Del Cole doesn't get drafted here. Virtanen, Hayden Fleury, Nick Ritchie, who's still a free agent, I believe. Brandon Perlini, Julius Honka, Sonny Milano. Then we get down to Tony DeAngelo. DeAngelo, for me, over like the one season in Carolina, I could have put him in this list, absolutely. But there's been too many instances where he's played his way out of an organization, and he's had too many times where he's a healthy scratch, and it just feels like, you know, he could get into the honorable mention category as well, but not top 30 in my eyes for this redraft. Fabry, good health, needed for him to end up in the top 30 for this redraft. Bleakley, as I mentioned, doesn't play in the National Hockey League. Sherbak, same story with him. Goldobin had an NHL career and then ended up going over to the KHL. Josh Ho-Sang, for whatever reason, it just didn't work at the NHL level. There was a lot of arguing about whether or not Lou Lamoriello was holding him back. And then he went to the Toronto organization, still didn't end up making it to the NHL. And then there's John Quenneville, who never quite hit either. But at number 30, you're not expecting a star player. And in this redraft, number 30 is Kasperi Kapanen, who was originally drafted 22nd by the Pittsburgh Penguins. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.